Now, you've worked across some incredible events with some hugely talented individuals, along with some particularly interesting research along the way. But I suppose with every story we have to start at the beginning. So your psychology journey started as a young rugby player looking to deal with anxiety before a match. How did that lead you to become a sports psychologist?
Well, it just intrigued me why it affected me in such a way, and that kind of motivated me to want to find out more about sports psychology. And in doing so, I sought out different qualifications I could follow, and started with sports science, and then ended up moving into the field of sports psychology thereafter. So it was as simple as that, really.
Well, like I mentioned, you have some major sports events coverage under your belt, and being employed by the Great Britain Wheelchair Basketball Association, working 2 Paralympic Games, World and European Championships, excuse me. Initially, though, you were employed as a match analyst.
Yeah.
How did that role develop into becoming a team sports psychologist?
Well, part of what I was doing at the time was studying for my Masters in Sports Psychology. So the role I fulfilled as match analyst was feeding back information and building rapport with the players. And there was a team psychologist at the time that kind of took me under her wing and mentored me in my development. And as my role progressed, that psychologist left Great Britain Wheelchair Basketball, and I undertook the role of sports psychologist thereafter. So that's how it developed.
You must have had some incredible memories covering those events. What stands out for you as the most memorable moment during that period of your career?
Okay, so in I think it was the Sydney Paralympic Games, we played the USA for the bronze medal match, and in the last 6 seconds we had a penalty ball, a sideline ball with 6 seconds left on the clock. So we had a timeout, we organised a play, and basically we gifted the ball to our best shooter, who failed to make the shot. It bounced off the backboards, and the USA guard caught the ball somewhere around the edge of the D with about 1 second left on the clock, and he lobbed it overarm through the air, and we lost by 1 point as it went all the way through the net. No ring at all, and that's my long-standing memory.
That seems like quite a painful memory to have then.
It's painful, but it was brilliant drama, so it was good to be a part of either way.
As the team sports psychologist then, did you find it quite difficult to pick the team back up after a loss that dramatic?
Yes, it was. It was, the biggest part of that is actually giving people space to process what's happened during that event. So the immediate aftermath is fairly simple as a sports psychologist. You're just there in case people want to speak to you. It's only in the kind of days and weeks afterwards that people, particularly the one player who missed the basket when he should have made it or could have made it, he had to sort of discuss through some of the stuff that was going on in his head about the event itself. So.
Well, sticking with the Olympic theme, you're also headhunted by the Finnish Olympic Committee and the Finnish Sports Institute leading into London 2012. What was it like to work within that environment?
No different really from any other sporting environment. I suppose slightly different culture. The Finns are an amazing group of people, very deadpan and dry sense of humour, but ultimately all interested in the same thing that we're interested in the UK is kind of developing elite athletes to their absolute potential, and my role in it was helping them out with some of the psychological aspects of actually more to do with their coaching processes rather than specifically their athletes themselves, and how they could instill some of the sort of basics of sports psychology into some of their coaching practices with their elite athletes.
And what were the main differences you noticed in how the British Olympic teams worked and the Finnish committee, if there were any at all?
There weren't really many. So we in the UK have a number of sports institutes. We've got one here in Cardiff. It's at Sophia Gardens, Welsh Institute of Sport. when I was in Finland, I was in a place called Kurtinen, and they had an Olympic institute there as well. Very similar culture. It's about performance, and it's about achieving the highest level of performance, and it's the support structures that are placed around these athletes and these coaches to help them to do it. So not a huge amount of difference apart from the dry sense of humour and the the grumpy, silly looking faces every now and again, but lovely people.
So how important is it for athletes to socialise with each other outside of training and competition in order to build that positive group dynamic, especially at a professional level? So you see nowadays most athletes might be on their phones in sort of centres and things like that. Is that a problem? Do you think it affects performance if they don't really, as a team group and sort of a team event?
Yeah, I mean, just because you see them on their phones doesn't mean that they don't interact at a team level. But I'm not a massive fan of spending long times in front of a screen, because I don't think particularly it's a very social thing to do. Elite athletes do manage to be social, though. It's a big part of their support structure, really, and social support within the elite athlete environment is really important from the perspective of coping with the stress and the pressures of being an elite athlete. So in most sports that I've worked in, athletes are fairly close with each other. You obviously get some conflict in some situations, but generally on the whole they're going through the same things, and therefore they have empathy with each other and they understand what each other are going through and the stresses they experience, and that kind of forms a common bond. And it's not dissimilar to bonds that you see in other domains of life, for example the military. So military men and women often report similar bonds of and a greater understanding that exists between people from the same walk of life, which I suppose is exactly what elite athletes are. They're all from the same walk of life.
I'm just going to stop it there from right back. So in your research within collective efficacy, are there any sort of gender differences that appear regularly, or are there a few changes in sort of the neuroscientific mechanisms between genders at all?
Don't know.
No,
don't know. I don't think there's any legitimate reason why, from a perspective of collective efficacy, there would be any gender differences. There have been some differences in terms of males and females in terms of cohesion. And I think it comes down to the fact that actually females generally tend to need to spend time together to feel close, whereas men tend to like to perform together to feel close. So if that makes sense. So generally speaking, social cohesion is a bigger part of female sport than it is in male sport. So male sports get a greater, I guess, sense of cohesion, satisfaction from playing well together, performing well together, and that makes them feel closer to their teammates. Whereas females prefer that kind of shared experience beforehand, and more so getting to know each other, and that when they get to know each other, they trust each other, and then they're more likely to perform at a high level together.
So in a male sort of sense, if a team is performing poorly and that would affect cohesion, how would you bring them back to that level of getting that performance going again?
Well, in terms of cohesion, you're looking to manipulate all sorts of factors. So it's not just that social element that leads to cohesion, or that success that leads to cohesion. It's a part of it, but it's also the environment as well that the athletes are in. So making sure that the culture is right, the team ethos is right, making sure that everyone is singing from the same song sheet. So, for example, making sure that everyone has the same team goals. So team goals is a big thing. What you often see in sports, and well, a good example might be Manchester United recently, is that there is a disparity between what the players want and what the coach wants, or what certain players want and what other players want, and not everyone's pulling in the same direction. And when you get that kind of disparity, then a kind of a negative culture develops, and that's where teams begin to fall apart. So in the case of Mourinho, for instance, the chances are that was almost a bit of a mutiny by the players, in the sense that they weren't, or they didn't feel it was going in the direction that they wanted it to go, so therefore they stopped playing for the gaffer.
Well, some of your more recent research has looked into cravings and addictions in rock climbers, and has identified some conceptual similarities between extreme sports athletes and those with drug and behavioural addictions. So can you explain the similarities you've identified in this research?
The similarities so far that we've identified relate to the notion of craving. So craving is a meta-motivational state that people experience when they abstain from the substance of choice or the drug of choice. And in this instance, it could be climbing. I'm not saying climbing is a drug, but in substance misuse it might be heroin, it might be cocaine or whatever. When we withdraw from that stimulus, then we crave it, and we generally find that this occurs not now. What we understand is that it doesn't just occur from a pharmacological perspective with drugs, but it can also occur from a behavioural perspective. So people can crave lots of things. So people can crave gambling, for instance, is another negative behavioural kind of craving that people experience. What we found is that with climbing, people experience something similar. So I'm a climber. If I don't climb regularly, I find that in the sort of like week after a climb, I crave getting back out there, and it's, we think, similar to the type of craving, probably not as bad or as extreme as those that have pharmacological cravings.
Now, one of the potential applications of this research is the possibility of a replacement drug therapy of some kind by using extreme sports as a way to get people into a more socially acceptable state. And how would a system such as this be developed, do you think?
It remains to be seen at this stage, because it's only hypothetical at the moment. We don't know whether it can be, so the very first stage will be actually to test it, so test an actual intervention, whether that's climbing or another sport, extreme sport, that produces similar craving effects. Be tested, and once it's tested, once we understand that it can be useful in that regard, then we might be then able to roll it out as a programme within a small scale, I would imagine, to start off with, and then if again that was successful, you roll it out on a larger scale.
So if that sort of testing is successful with this kind of therapy, how would individual differences be accounted for? Extreme sports might not be effective for some people,
yeah.
and for most even. So for a specific type of individual that can only benefit from this kind of therapy, or could it be generalised across the whole population?
It just as people have a drug of choice, people have a sport of choice. We picked out on rock climbing just because there was the ideal population that we could test in South Wales. Notionally, it could be any sport, really. If any behaviour can create a craving, then we can use, and it's socially desirable, then we can kind of use that potentially as a replacement. There's some evidence already, so using football as a means to help drug addicts or substance misusers to overcome their addiction, or at least support them through the process of that kind of rehab. But again, we've yet to test it in the context of climbing.
So you also have worked with 65 Degrees North,
Yep.
Which is a wonderful organisation that helps to rehabilitate wounded servicemen and women. Tell us how you got involved with the organisation and about the work that they do.
Okay, so it was about 5 years ago, I think, off the top of my head, when 65 Degrees North came into being, and they did a expedition across the Greenland ice cap, supporting a veteran who was a double amputee called Peter Bowker, and he was to be the first solo, unsupported expedition of an amputee across the Greenland ice cap, and they were successful in doing it. During that time, I was part of the research unit at Swansea University, where I was based prior to being here, and they approached us because they were the main guy, Richard Morgan, was based from there, and he approached the sports science department and asked for our help to support, and it's grown from there. So since then, I've been involved with numerous expeditions, some of the cycle expeditions across the Pyrenees, a number of the mountain expeditions to Aconcagua, and this April they're heading out to Everest, and my role is the expedition psychologist, if you like, so I help people prepare mentally for the challenges that they're going to face out on the hill, on the mountain, or on the bike, wherever it might be. and then when they come back, it's about reflection and debrief and learn what other learning experiences. The point being is that by doing these challenges, they learn something about themselves. It helps them deal with some of their mental health issues, and then it makes them in a stronger position then to approach civilian life in general.
Well, you listed a number of expeditions there. Which one for you stands out as sort of the most memorable one you've been on, and where you've really challenged yourself?
Well, I don't often go on the challenges themselves, so I'm usually, as often the case with sports science support across the board, is not always that the sports scientists end up going. I was out in the Pyrenees for was called the Raid in 2017, which was a cycle ride from the which way it went from the Atlantic across to the Mediterranean, all the way across the Pyrenees. So that was fairly memorable. Actually, this summer in June, I'll be going out and doing the race across America, so I'll be supporting that. So that might be even more memorable. But yeah, they've all been good, all the ones I've been involved with.
Well, the organisation is making an attempt to climb Everest this year. Have you been involved in any of the planning or preparation for that event? Or?
Yeah, some parts. Last year I was out in Chamonix helping the guys train and prepare for the expedition, and some of the guys that were out there have been selected to do the Everest challenge. And then most of my stuff is then just bespoke as and when people need to speak to me or have something to discuss. I'm the guy that they call.
And what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome when working with elite athletes you've found? And what advice would you give someone looking to make their way into sports psychology themselves?
Biggest challenges? I'm not sure I really have an answer to the biggest challenges. The nature of sports psychology is that I suppose everything is a challenge in the sense that you're always dealing with individuals, and every individual is unique, and because they're unique, the challenges that they present to you as a sports psychologist are always unique, and that's I guess why it's never dull being a sports psychologist. I suppose personally one of the biggest challenges is that when you're away with a team, for instance, you're never off duty as a psychologist, so whereas physios work very hard up until about 10 o'clock at night or wherever, doing massages. I've had knocks on the door in my hotel room at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, of people that can't get to sleep because they've got stuff going on in their head, and you have to wake yourself out of your stupor and have a conversation with them. So yeah, I suppose that would be a fairly big challenge, but it's not, it's all part of the job, I guess.
So what advice would you give to someone looking to make their way into sports psychology?
Well, firstly, do the right training. It's a long road, so you've got to be prepared for a long road. So I think I suppose to be a practicing sports psychologist, not necessarily an academic sports psychologist, you do a degree and then a master's. So that's 4 years at the very least, and then you do 2 years of supervised practice. So that's 6 years in total. So it's a long road. It can be expensive to train, so you've got to really want to do it, and you've got to really be committed to do it. But I suppose the advice is that once you've committed to that, then you immerse yourself in sports psychology. You don't do it half-hearted. You don't take just a small interest. You immerse yourself, learn everything you possibly can. You take opportunities when they arise. So if someone offers you experience, you take that opportunity because you never know where it's going to lead. And when you do get given those opportunities, you make sure you make the best impression you possibly can.
Thank you very much.
Okay.